Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to unpack the incredible story of how Himachal Pradesh went from a collection of tiny mountain kingdoms to the modern Indian state we know today.
So that's the big question, right? How on earth did this patchwork of mountain kingdoms, constantly caught in the crossfire of massive empires, ever become one unified Indian state? It's a story packed with drama, ambition, and a real fight for identity.
All right, here's our roadmap. We'll start with the early kingdoms, see how empires clashed in the hills, then cover the British arrival, the 57 rebellion, the local freedom struggle, and finally, the birth of the modern state. Let's get into it.
First up, a land of kingdoms. We're talking about a time before the big empires really showed up on the scene, when this whole area was a mosaic of small, fiercely independent hill states.
So let's paint a picture of this pre-British landscape. For centuries, you had all these separate little kingdoms, like Chumba and Bilaspur. They weren't strangers to conflict. They saw invasions way back in 1009 AD from Mahmud Ghazni, and then Rajput rulers took over around 1043. But the real game changer? The mighty Mughal Empire starts to weaken. It's got its own internal problems, and that creates a massive power vacuum in the hills. And you can bet the local rulers saw their chance. They jumped on it, started asserting their independence, and that really set the stage for everything that came next.
And speaking of local rulers seizing their chance, look no further than Maharaja Sansar Chand of Kangra. This guy was the textbook example. He was an absolute powerhouse. Once he got his hands on the Kangra fort, which was a huge deal, he just started expanding his territory. He brought states like Chamba, Mandi, and Sukhet under his thumb. For a time, he was the guy, the undisputed top dog in the hills. Okay, so Sansar Chand is on top of the world. But that's not going to last. The hills are about to turn into a massive battleground. You've got two huge powers closing in, the Gorkhas from the east and the Sikhs from the west.
And things escalated fast. The Gorkhas get powerful in Nepal and just start marching west. By 1806, their general Amar Singh Thapa even defeats Sansar Chand himself. But, and this is a big but, they couldn't capture the Kangra fort. So, what does Sansar Chand do? In a totally desperate move, he teams up with his rival Maharaja Ranjit Singh of the Sikh Empire. And believe it or not, it worked. By 1809, they managed to push the Gorkhas out. This really shows you the different playbooks these two empires were using. The Gorkhas, they were all about conquest. Just grab land, annex states, capture forts. Simple. But the Sikh Empire was playing chess, not checkers. They were more strategic, making alliances with local guys like Sansar Chand to build influence and block the Gorkhas. It was a true geopolitical showdown right there in the mountains.
So you've got all this chaos and fighting, and whenever there's chaos, someone's waiting in the wings to take advantage. In this case, it was a new, highly organized power, the British East India Company. Well, the Gorkhas kept pushing their luck, expanding further and further south until they finally bumped up against British-controlled land. You know what that means? It led directly to the Anglo-Gorkha War, and trust me, this war was a turning point that changed everything for the region. And the result? It was a total game changer. The British, with help from some of the local hill rulers, completely kicked the Gorkhas out. So, with the Gorkhas gone and the Sikhs eventually contained, who was left standing? Yep, the British. They became the new top power, and they started by snapping up key places like Shimla.
All right, let's jump forward a few decades to 1857, the year of the Great Indian Rebellion. You'd think everyone would be on the same page, right? Well, for the hill states, the answer was complicated. It really shows a deep divide.
First thing to get is that the folks in the hills weren't really as caught up in the political fervor as people in other parts of India. For many of them, this was a distant conflict. Their loyalties were local. They were worried about their own valleys and kingdoms, not necessarily a big pan-Indian cause. And this just shows you how split things were. You had rulers from places like Chamba and Bilaspur who were actively helping the British. But then you have the ruler of Bushar being openly hostile. And in Siba state, the Raja's own sons led a revolt. So it's clear there was no single response. It was a messy mix of loyalty, resistance, and probably a bit of opportunism too. But as we head into the 20th century, sometimes starts to change. That sense of political distance, it starts to fade away. A new kind of thinking, a real political consciousness, begins to bubble up right there in the hills.
And what's really cool is how this freedom struggle took shape locally. You had the Prajamandals, which were these popular movements pushing for reforms against both the British and their own local princes. Then you had more radical stuff, like the Monty Conspiracy, an actual armed plot inspired by revolutionaries. And later, the Pahod agitation in Sirmaur tied the local fight directly into the massive nationwide Quit India movement. And of course, this movement had its heroes. You had people like Dr. Y.S. Parmar. We'll hear more about him later. He's basically the architect of the modern state. And figures like Padam Dev and the incredible Pahari Gandhi, Baba Kanshi Ram. These were the people who gave a voice to the struggle, really championing the cause for freedom in the hills. So, India gets its independence in 1947. And now comes the final and maybe the trickiest part of the whole story. How do you take all these different princely states and territories and stitch them together into one modern state? Yeah, this did not happen overnight. It was a long, step-by-step journey. In 48, it becomes a chief commissioner's province, basically pulling 31 states together. Then in 51, it's a Part C state. Then a union territory in 56. A really huge step was in 1966, when major areas from Punjab, like Kangra, were merged in. It took decades of these administrative changes before the final act was passed.
And then, finally, 18. On January 25, 1971, Himachal Pradesh officially became the 18th state of the Indian Union. What an incredible journey, right? From all those scattered kingdoms to this.
So, when you look back at it all, what does this story really teach us? It's more than just regional history, isn't it? It's a fantastic look at the real tough challenges of nation building, how you take so many different pieces and make them into a single unified whole.
Hey, if you enjoyed this explainer, you should definitely check out our South Asia history playlist. We've got more stories just like this one that dive deep into the region's incredible past. And hey, if you like these kinds of breakdowns, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button for notebook summaries. Thanks so much for joining us.